Welcome to our immigration briefing show. Today, we're diving into a whirlwind of powerful stories from Minneapolis to nationwide protests. First up, a Minneapolis church held a heartfelt Lament and Hope service amid fears of immigration crackdowns, especially after a woman was shot by an ICE agent nearby. The community gathered to support each other, emphasizing resilience and unity in these challenging times. Next, Hollywood stars took a stand at the Golden Globes, wearing anti-ICE pins to protest the killing of Renee Good. This act of activism highlights how cultural moments can spotlight social justice issues, adding a voice to the ongoing debate about immigration enforcement and law enforcement accountability. Celebrities are using their platform to demand change and justice. Finally, the situation in Minneapolis remains tense, with large protests, confrontations, and increased federal presence following the tragic shooting. Community members, local officials, and activists are calling for investigations and justice, as the city grapples with the fallout from this incident. The protests and unrest reflect a broader fight for fairness and human rights across the country. Please continue to stay tuned for more detailed updates. The Minneapolis Star reports a poignant scene at St. Paul San Pablo Lutheran Church, where a service of lament and hope was held amidst the chaos and fear wrought by recent immigration enforcement actions. The church, deeply rooted in a diverse community, served as a sanctuary where candles flickered, hymns echoed, and prayers were offered for Renee Good, the woman shot by an ICE officer. Inside, congregants, many of whom are immigrants themselves, found solace and strength in their faith, even as outside agents detained individuals amid protests, whistles, and drums. The service underscored the resilience of a community grappling with trauma, fear, and the urgent need for justice, with members expressing how their lives have been forever changed by the recent violence and enforcement crackdowns. Meanwhile, The Independent highlights a wave of celebrity activism at the Golden Globes, where stars donned anti-ICE pins bearing slogans like "Be Good" and "Ice Out" to protest the deadly actions of immigration officers. Mark Ruffalo and other high-profile figures used the red carpet as a platform to raise awareness about the recent killing of Renee Good and other incidents involving ICE officers. The campaign, driven by grassroots organizers, aims to leverage the cultural influence of Hollywood to spotlight the ongoing violence and push for accountability. This year's awards ceremony marked a more overtly political stance, with celebrities and activists rallying around the cause, distributing pins at parties, and vowing to keep the pressure on throughout awards season, echoing a long tradition of artists speaking out for justice in moments of crisis. The Associated Press provides a stark, on-the-ground account of the tense confrontations and arrests unfolding in Minneapolis in the days following the fatal shooting. As federal immigration officers carried out enforcement operations in residential neighborhoods, community members and activists responded with vocal protests, banging drums, shouting, and even pepper spraying officers in their efforts to resist detention. Heart-wrenching scenes emerged, with families reacting emotionally to arrests, some weeping, others yelling at officers, highlighting the emotional toll and chaos caused by the aggressive crackdown. The images depict a community deeply divided, grappling with fear and resistance amid the ongoing enforcement, illustrating the intense human impact of immigration policies that continue to inflame tensions and provoke confrontations in the city's streets. The "Ice Out for Good" protests, as reported by Yahoo US, vividly depict a nationwide outcry against immigration enforcement tactics, sparked by the tragic death of Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered in Uptown, Charlotte, rallying with music, speeches, and marches through the streets to condemn Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The protests were fueled by outrage over the killing of Good, a poet and mother, and the broader implications of aggressive federal immigration raids. Supporters, including groups like Indivisible Charlotte, Carolina's Migrant Network, and the Poor People's Campaign, expressed grief and anger, emphasizing the need for accountability and justice. Meanwhile, the response from officials was dismissive, with the GOP condemning the protests as attempts to demonize law enforcement, reflecting the deep political divide over immigration enforcement practices. In Minneapolis, the scene was tense and chaotic, with federal agents executing what authorities called their largest-ever immigration enforcement operation amid ongoing unrest. Video footage captured agents forcefully ramming a home's door and making arrests, often amid protests and community outrage. Protesters, many of whom had been trained as observers to monitor enforcement activities, lined the streets, honking horns and blowing whistles to disrupt the operation. The community's anxiety was palpable, especially after the shooting of Good, which has intensified fears of further violence and racial profiling. Local leaders, including Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and U.S. Senator Tina Smith, called for a more thorough investigation into the incident, criticizing the federal government's handling and questioning its objectivity, especially given prior statements by ICE officials defending the officers' actions. The protests extended beyond Minneapolis, with the Chicago area witnessing its second day of demonstrations in solidarity with Good and against federal law enforcement tactics. Organized by Indivisible Chicago Alliance, over 20 protests took place across Illinois, with participants holding signs demanding justice and accountability. Despite the continued defense by Trump administration officials, who claimed Good posed a threat by weaponizing her vehicle, the demonstrators called for due process and condemned the use of force. The nationwide protests, numbering over 1,000, reflected widespread dissatisfaction with immigration enforcement policies, especially after the shooting of Good was labeled by some officials as an act of domestic terrorism. Leaders like Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and others voiced concerns about the legality and morality of such operations, highlighting the deep divisions and the urgent demand for reform and justice in the wake of these tragic events. The Independent reports that Dave Matthews, the renowned rock star, has publicly condemned the Trump administration's handling of immigration enforcement, particularly criticizing the death of Renee Good, a mother shot by ICE agents in Minneapolis. Matthews expressed outrage over the use of federal funds for ICE, describing agents as masked thugs, terrorizing communities and tearing families apart. He shared a powerful video showing the incident, where Good's car was surrounded by ICE officers, and she was shot multiple times as she attempted to escape. Matthews sharply criticized the administration's narrative, calling out officials like Kristi Noem and others for being deeply dishonest and labeling them revolting. His emotional plea underscores the deep discontent with how the government is managing immigration issues and the tragic loss of innocent lives, emphasizing the need for compassion over violence. BBC details the Trump administration's decision to send hundreds more federal officers to Minneapolis amid ongoing protests over the deadly shooting of Renee Good. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem justified the move, claiming it was necessary to ensure the safety of ICE and Border Patrol personnel, asserting that the officers acted in self-defense. However, local officials and protesters vehemently dispute this narrative, insisting that Good posed no threat and that the shooting was unjustified. Demonstrations erupted across the country, with tens of thousands gathering in Minneapolis and other cities like Austin, Seattle, and Los Angeles to demand the removal of ICE from their communities. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey condemned the incident as a peaceful protest and dismissed the administration's characterization of Good as a domestic terrorist, emphasizing that she was simply trying to escape the scene. The situation has heightened tensions, with critics accusing the federal government of attempting to cover up the truth and escalate repression. Deutsche Welle reports on the massive protests in Minneapolis, where tens of thousands marched in freezing weather to demand justice and the withdrawal of ICE agents following the fatal shooting of Renee Good. The demonstrators, outraged by what they see as a clear case of police brutality and federal overreach, confronted ICE personnel at a gas station and called for the agency's immediate departure from the city. Local and state officials, including Minnesota Democrats, have accused the federal government of obstructing investigations and attempting to hide the circumstances surrounding Good's death. Witnesses and community leaders maintain that the killing was a crime, contradicting the federal claim of self-defense. The incident has become a flashpoint for broader debates over immigration enforcement, police accountability, and federal intervention, with the community demanding accountability and an end to aggressive immigration tactics. The Bergen Record reports a surge of protests across North Jersey, ignited by the recent shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. Demonstrators in towns like Rutherford, Montclair, Jersey City, and Highland Park are rallying against what they see as policies that criminalize immigrants and foster violence. These protests are fueled by the disturbing video footage of the shooting, which many believe contradicts the official narrative presented by the federal government. Rebecca Winter, a spokesperson for the grassroots organization 50501, emphasizes that the recent protests feel different because they involve a tragic incident involving a mother and a white woman, highlighting the racial disparities in the treatment of immigrants and minorities. The movement has gained momentum, with people waking up to the possibility that they or their loved ones could be victims of similar violence, prompting widespread activism and calls for accountability. The Toronto Star details the tense atmosphere in Minneapolis as the city braces for ongoing immigration enforcement operations following the shooting death of Renee Good. Federal agents have been conducting aggressive raids in residential neighborhoods, confronting residents with horns, whistles, and even chemical sprays, leading to physical altercations and arrests. Local officials like Minneapolis City Council member Jason Chavez expressed concern over the scale of these operations, which seem to have intensified since the incident. The controversy is compounded by disagreements between local and federal authorities over the investigation's oversight. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Senator Tina Smith urge for a more impartial investigation involving state authorities, criticizing the federal government's biased stance and its initial defense of the ICE officer. The incident has sparked a nationwide wave of protests, with thousands rallying in Minneapolis and other cities, demanding justice and transparency. Haley Evans reports from the Arizona Republic on a coordinated nationwide effort to protest ICE practices, specifically in Mesa, Arizona. The ICE Out for Good weekend of action includes peaceful demonstrations aimed at supporting immigrant communities and spreading awareness about their rights. The event in Mesa, scheduled for January 11, is part of a broader movement responding to the tragic shooting of Renee Good and similar incidents across the country. Organizers emphasize nonviolence and the importance of educating residents about constitutional protections during encounters with immigration officials. These protests reflect growing public outrage over increased federal enforcement, especially in major urban centers, and serve as a call for reform and greater accountability in immigration policies. The demonstrations aim to foster solidarity and empower immigrant communities through information sharing and peaceful activism. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune vividly captures the intense controversy surrounding the fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good, a community volunteer and legal observer, by an ICE officer. Mayor Jacob Frey passionately urges the FBI to involve Minnesota's authorities in the investigation, criticizing the Trump administration's rush to label Good's actions as domestic terrorism without sufficient evidence. Frey and Democratic Senator Tina Smith expressed concern about federal overreach and a lack of transparency, especially after the Department of Homeland Security's Secretary Kristi Noem dismissed state jurisdiction and defended the officer's actions as self-defense. The incident has ignited national debate, with video footage revealing Good's calm demeanor and her words, "I'm not mad at you," moments before she was shot, starkly contrasting the initial claims that she tried to run down the officer. The controversy underscores a broader distrust in federal investigations, fueled by political rhetoric and conflicting narratives, with local leaders and residents demanding accountability and transparency amidst accusations of systemic racism and abuse of power. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation offers a poignant portrait of the community's grief and outrage in Minneapolis, highlighting the emotional toll of Good's death on local residents and Somali immigrants. Fathmo Hassan, a mourner at the memorial, describes Good as a respected mother and community helper, whose life was tragically cut short during an ICE operation targeting undocumented migrants, predominantly from the Somali community. The city, still haunted by the memory of George Floyd's murder, now faces renewed wounds as protests erupt over what many see as unjustified violence and systemic racism. The aggressive federal immigration crackdown, involving the deployment of thousands of officers during the largest operation in Minneapolis history, has intensified tensions, especially as political figures like President Trump and Noem attack the Somali community and exaggerate the scope of immigration fraud. Amidst the chaos, community members express fear, anger, and a sense of betrayal, with some fearing that the incident signals a dangerous escalation of federal overreach and racial injustice, rekindling deep-seated wounds in a city still healing from past tragedies. The Independent reports on the federal government's response, revealing plans to send hundreds more officers to Minnesota in the wake of protests and the shooting. Kristi Noem announced that the Department of Homeland Security would reinforce ICE and Border Patrol agents, citing the need to ensure their safety during ongoing demonstrations. Over 2,000 federal officers have already been dispatched, marking what DHS claims as its largest operation ever in Minneapolis. The deployment coincides with over 1,000 planned rallies nationwide protesting the federal deportation policies and the shooting of Good. Critics argue that the aggressive federal response exacerbates tensions, especially as evidence suggests the shooting was unjustified, with bystander videos indicating Good was turning away rather than threatening the officer. While officials like Noem and Tom Homan defend the officer's actions as self-defense, Minnesota authorities have initiated their own investigation, amid accusations that federal agencies are obstructing local efforts. The escalating militarization and conflicting narratives deepen distrust between communities and federal authorities, raising urgent questions about justice, systemic racism, and the future of immigration enforcement in America. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6 Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6 team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6 Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6 Brief via email.
Turn on the TV screen, see the world unseen. China's on the news tonight, history in the spotlight. Scroll through my phone again, find out where to begin. Stories from the east to west, learning from the very best. News in China every day, learning in a fun new way. From the cities to the farms, feel the heartbeat, feel the charm. Ancient tales in modern times, mountains high and river rise. Culture rich in every town, golden driving never down. Every headline a new friend, from beginning to the end. Connecting hearts through every word, China's story always heard. News in China every day, learning a fun new way. From the cities to the farms, feel the heartbeat, feel the charm. Every headline a new friend, from beginning to the end. Connecting hearts through every word, China's story